right, thank you, and thank you everybody for coming back from lunch. I saw on the restaurant list that there's a place called Insomnia Cookie, and if it was me, I would probably still be there, so kudos to you all for making it back. I'd like to start by introducing the panel for this session. First, we'll hear from Stephen Mittner, who is the head of Compliance Team 1 at MHRA, where he leads the compliance team to deliver inspections and new approaches to compliance activities related to GCP, GVP, and GLP. Next, I'll be back up to provide FDA updates. As Ray said, I'm the Associate Director for Regulatory Development in OSI and CEDAR, and I develop regulations and guidance related to GCP, human subject protection, post-market safety, and other BIMO compliance programs. And finally, a man who needs no introduction after his busy day up here yesterday, but we have Hossein Abid from Health Canada, who is the National Manager for Health Canada's Clinical Trial Compliance Program. So I'm going to start by turning it over to Stephen.
Okay, hi everyone. So I guess just give a very quick explanation of what I'm here to do. I'm going to talk about some of the strategy and future plans that the MHRA have and that we're working on over the next few years and have started work on now, and which basically, as you can see, relates to baseball. So what we're really trying to do at the moment is several key areas, and really our current plans and initiatives, we can put them together and just think about decision making. We all make decisions every day, and as regulators, we're no different. And just framing this as trying to hit a baseball, there's lots of decisions that get made of deciding when to swing for the ball, whether to leave it, and all of this kind of information that's processed around making that step. So if we just think about that decision as we just work through some of the things we're looking at, hopefully things will just kind of try to make some sense. So hitting this baseball, there's capability that the batter needs to have some sort of talent and some sort of training and skills to enable that step to be taken. And data, certainly in sports now, data plays a huge part. And again, a batter waiting to hit a ball has got all sorts of analytics and information fed to them now. And you only have to watch a major league game and you can see all of the tablets with all of the data on the pitcher, all the different types of spin rates, et cetera, and how data has now transformed just how that sport works. So again, data is so important for that decision making. And that, of course, links into the technology, of training techniques and all of the computer systems, radar, all these things that are helping inform that decision making. And then finally, collaboration. And here again, you've got collaboration with the teammates of sharing information, of just tips and hints, but also collaboration with the other team, which I guess is where regulators kind of suddenly might appear, in that there's a kind of reliance that there's a collaboration, that we follow the rules, that we do things in the right spirit. So all of these things are helping with that kind of activity of trying to hit that ball, that you're kind of hoping the pitcher hasn't got spider tack all over their hands and then is really sort of pushing the boundaries, if you like, of what we'd expect. So those are the kind of themes as well that are driving our strategy and how we're looking to develop our compliance team. So 2 years ago, we did a lot of work of just looking at what we call the pillars of our strategy and how they support our development as we move forward as inspectors. And they fall into these 6 categories around enhancing the use of data and intelligence, upstream intervention, how we don't just rely on inspection to inform who we're working with and who we're inspecting. We can actually try and engage more away from the inspection of improving compliance. Technology is an enabler of just what tools are out there that can help us deliver inspections better and decision making, how we can incentivize people to be compliant and to look at best practice, how we can collaborate and partner, whether it be with regulators or industry or trade bodies. And then a really important one for us of capability and capacity of our inspectors, of how we train and develop and retain and actually get smarter at the way we work. So these underpin a lot of the initiatives that we're working on, or we're starting to work on, or will be working on in the future. So looking at these kind of themes, so capability, here we're looking at training. The world's changed. We were swapping inspection war stories over dinner this week, and really just reflecting back on how things have changed over 12 years of how we would inspect, of the walking into a room full of ring binders and paper records, and how now it moves, so electronic, of just how training has to evolve with what we're looking at, and providing tools to make people more capable, whether it's technology that the inspector's using, or actually tools to help us select where we go to inspect. This effective use of data, the days of flicking through page after page are long gone. We're now presented with huge data sets to either help us inspect or help us inform where we're going to go. And recruitment, attracting the talent of getting the people that we need, and the ever-evolving requirements around training and skills. So these are a core effort of our way forward now, of just looking how we develop and get more effective with the teams that we have. So data, and this is probably the largest portion of work that we're looking at the moment. Inspection planning of just all of the different data sources that are available to us, or need to be available to us, whether that is information from the application steps, risk signals, product types, inspection history, compliance information. All of this data is streaming down like in the matrix, and we need a way of just pulling all of that together to help us make informed decisions of where the best place is to put our resource. Inspection conduct and data, as I just alluded to, has completely changed over the years, and now we're looking more and more about how we use the data that we're presented on to help us be more effective on inspection. So we're not spending all of our time in your boardroom reading through all of the data. We're actually processing it differently to then point us to where we need to look. So we're actually being more effective on site, and obviously not wasting your time asking for you to get us lots and lots of copies of Excel spreadsheets. We're hoping that we can already do a lot of that work before we get on site. And equally, data about our own performance is important, because it tells us how we are delivering our services, whether they're on time, where we may have bottlenecks, and just so we can track and trend as well what our performance is telling us about how we are delivering our inspections. So technology links into the data, and big part of what we're looking at the moment, and working together with our partners, is when we're on inspection of just what tools we've got to help us visualize data. So we're not relying on lots of line listings, that we're actually looking at software that will help us visualize and pick out trends and issues, whether it be from an audit trail or a line listing or any type of document. And again, hardware, just simple little things. If you've ever watched an inspector with a very small laptop, it's not quite as good as if you're at home with your big monitor and can drag and drop lots of things around. Just lots of small little things like that. How do we take notes? How do we record data? Just trying to make things more effective and life a lot easier for the people that are on site doing the work. And again, I had to put it in somewhere, artificial intelligence. We're constantly asked about it being used, whether it be in pharmacovigilance, GCP, what guidance are we going to write, what can we do? Equally, we're looking internally about what opportunities have we got to maximise this huge leap forwards in technology now, of how that can help us inspect, whether it's getting to an answer quicker or helping us with looking at all of this data, of what opportunities are there just to harness this power, again, to make our time more valuable. Rather than farming data, we've got the answers or the indications of what to do and where to look. And collaboration, so how we're here shows some level of collaboration with the FDA and Health Canada. So really, again, we're just building these partnerships is important to us, so sharing experience, best practice, sharing resource, learning, but also preventing non-compliance by upstream engagement. So standing here, we want to learn how effective is it, where we're giving examples of issues and findings of it. Is that actually having any influence on improving compliance or addressing any issues. And also thinking about areas such as behavioural science, of how we communicate, how does that message get through, and what influence does that have on behaviour? If we word something differently, will it affect the outcome? So these are all things that we're starting to look at, of just how this can actually help us and help you be more compliant, and whether there's things that we can do that are a lot less stressful, rather than us coming en masse and inspecting. If we can communicate and work together differently away from the inspection arena, will this actually be better for compliance and patient safety? And then we've got this interesting point here, outcome-based cooperative regulation, and James alluded to it during the opening address. What this really is just kind of trying to look at things slightly differently, rather than that there be this relationship of you do work, we come inspect, we tell you it's wrong, or right, obviously, and then it loops back round, and we just see this continuous almost sort of quality control, quality assurance sort of relationship building up. Outcome-based cooperative regulations are kind of a theory and just a paper that's already been written, where it really talks about the whole concept of actually enabling an organisation to opt for basing their activities around demonstration that they can be trusted. The idea being that if, as a regulator, as inspectors, that we're interacting with the organisation in a trusted environment where there's a lot more open communication about problems and how things are shared, then that should mean that by working together, everyone will be more compliant. A good example of this in the UK is aviation, where there's a scheme where trust is a huge part of how airlines will work, where there's a culture of if you see something wrong, you report it, and then you tell the regulator, and the regulator then works out, is this dangerous, or can we let someone fix it, or do we need to intervene? So it's looking at this whole concept of just, if that relationship changes between us as a regulator and inspectors, and there is this open dialogue of partnership and sharing information, this level of trust will build. And that's not just trust from us to you, it's trust from you to us, that if you tell us something that we need to be involved in fixing, we shouldn't then, we heard, bring in the cavalry. The way we react needs to be in that trusted environment as well, that we will then work to try and fix and put things right, rather than come and take the door down and then start criticising people and raising huge actions to fix. We still need to have that line, but will that relationship evolve enough to allow compliance to improve together as a regulator and as an organisation? So this is all very new for us, and it's something that we're just trying to learn and engage with some of our partners around, but it's something that we're just pursuing. Is this a new model of compliance that we can look at in the future? So to summarise things here, these really underpin of where we're trying to go as a regulator at the moment. And just working through what we've touched on there, capability is so important to us because we need to evolve, and we need to work together with our people that we inspect and our partners of how we do this, of making sure as inspectors we've got the right skills. And one thing that we've really focused and we're looking at around this is diversity. And by that I mean as much diversity of thought, in that we can't all think the same way. We need to be consistent. We need to apply the law consistently and guidance consistently. But what we don't want is groupthink. We need the diversity to challenge the way we work and to challenge how we can change things and to look at things slightly differently. So that's a massive part of the work that we're trying to do now. And then that feeds into how we recruit, how we train, and how we get the skills that we need. Data's only going to get a bigger and bigger part of our job and our roles, and also how you operate. So we really need to understand how to maximise the availability of that data, and then how we use it and how we use it effectively to help us inspect and to also help us understand your operations and to be able to see any trends or any issues that might be just suggesting that they're growing and may get big, and address it before it happens. And equally, our systems need to start to inform us effectively of where to put our resource, because we can't inspect everything. So we need to be smart about where we deploy our resource. And technology enables the use of the data, us to be more capable. And we need to look at what you're doing. We need to look at new ways that we can do things, and just how we can be more effective about actually processing all this information that we're presented with on a daily basis. And then we've got collaboration. We will continue to grow our partnerships with fellow regulators, and also to engage as much as we can with organisations that are doing all of this regulated work. And really, collaboration, when I really start thinking about it, one of the things that we hear so much when we're opening inspections, closing inspections, is just always the comments that we're all here for the same thing. We're here for patients and getting new medicines to the market. And then when we just reflect back on the baseball, the collaboration is that we're not the batter and you're the pitcher. Actually, we're all the batter. We're trying to hit the ball to get the medicines to the patient. And if we can work together and understand each other, then we can work forward to achieving that. So I think really that's what I just wanted to leave everyone is that, we will evolve and we will change, and collaboration is a huge part of where we want to go, and hopefully that'll be something we'll work on in the future. So thank you very much. So I'll now hand over to Emily, so thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. I have to say I was impressed with your knowledge of America's pastime, but I just should point out that we do call it a field and not a pitch. So, so again, my name's Emily Gebbia, and I have about 12 minutes to provide updates on FDA's policies, guidance, and initiatives. We issued over 100 guidances alone last year, so I can talk fast, but instead I'm going to just focus on one area, and that's clinical trial innovation, which you may have been able to tell from my title, Innovating, Innovative, Innovation, and I should have added innovatively. So during my remarks today, I'd like to provide some context for FDA's efforts to encourage clinical trial innovation, highlight some of the FDA guidances relevant to clinical trial innovation, many of which have been covered by other presentations over the past 2 days, and then discuss some of the barriers to and opportunities for increasing clinical trial innovation. So I want to start by acknowledging that efforts to encourage clinical trial innovation are not new. I recently came across a Federal Register notice from the 1980s talking about a regulation update started in the 1970s that was, quote, intended to encourage innovation. So what hasn't changed is our focus on protecting the rights, safety, and welfare of our clinical trial participants, although even the terminology has changed, right? They're participants now and not subjects, as well as the need to ensure data quality and integrity. But what has changed, or why is innovation new again? Obviously, we've talked a lot the past 2 days about the technological revolution that really enables new ways of doing things. I think that there are also business and moral imperatives for change right now. So on the business side, folks have already mentioned many times the cost and increasing complexity of clinical trials. I think this also shows up in the kinds of trials that are being done, with more trials that are in rare diseases and that are being requiring study designs and study conduct in new and innovative ways. And then on the moral side, obviously we have an increasing emphasis on ensuring diversity, inclusion, and equity in clinical trials, and making sure that the patient voice is considered and incorporated. So there are ongoing efforts to encourage clinical trial innovation that are bolstered by recent legislation. It's not just a few of us in Cedar waving our hands trying to get the message across. The Food and Drug Omnibus Reform Act of 2022, or FDORA, included a number of provisions relevant to advancing clinical trial innovation, some of which I've listed here, but there are even more, including provisions specifically related to improving clinical trial diversity. And I show this just to help emphasize that there's real momentum and broad buy-in across government for these initiatives. So, many of you may have seen the famous New Yorker cartoon where you have a gentleman in an office saying, "I'll be happy to give you innovative thinking. What are the guidelines?" Well, FDA has the guidelines. We have discussed a lot of them during this meeting already on how to design and conduct trials. This includes the Digital Health Technologies final guidance. We also have the Decentralized Clinical Trials Draft Guidance. And of course, mentioned many times, ICH E6R3. We also have guidances about innovative approaches to FDA's own oversight and assessment of clinical trials, which were discussed earlier this morning, the RIE guidance and the RRA guidance. But that's not all. We have other guidances that we've released recently that are also relevant to clinical trial innovation. We have real-world data guidances. We have our guidance on considerations for the conduct of clinical trials during major disruptions. We have, I wanted to mention on this one too, we also had a public meeting in October that was required under FDORA. So not just guidance, public meetings, opportunities to dialogue on these. We have our risk-based approach to monitoring Q&A guidance, which was recently updated. We have our draft Part 11 guidance. So with all of this guidance, we see everybody running out to innovate all the time, right? Not so fast. We did see a rapid acceleration in the adoption of innovative approaches during COVID out of necessity. A lot of people have talked about that, and I think there was and maybe continues to be an expectation that these innovations are going to just continue and we'll see more and more uptake. But we actually have some signs of a retreat back to pre-pandemic norms in some of the innovative things that were tried during COVID. So this is actually from a presentation by Ken Getz from the Tufts Center for the Study of Drug Development, which he presented at that public meeting on clinical trial disruptions last October. And luckily enough, his group was doing a study of remote and virtual solutions, the adoption of them in clinical trials right before the pandemic outbreak. And then they were able to go back and look at adoption sort of at the height of the pandemic and then a few years later. And what the data actually shows is there's been a retreat in the use of remote and virtual clinical trial elements over, since the height of the pandemic. And in fact, in some cases below pre-pandemic levels. I also have just an article here from the Pink Sheet, a recent Pink Sheet article about the lack of trial applications with decentralized elements in the EU. We're also hearing about this. We were FDA and Duke Margolis had a meeting last month about quality by design and risk-based management, where this was a theme among them. So the question is, what's going on? Well, to know what's going on, we have to understand what the barriers are to clinical trial innovation. Carolee Holverson wrote a paper on overcoming barriers to the adoption of innovations. It was done in connection with a federal toolkit for innovation, so it focused on barriers to innovation and government policy, but I think they apply well outside of that context as well. And so one of the things that she did is she made a distinction between perceived barriers to innovation and actual barriers, which were often not regulatory barriers. So I don't want to discount regulatory barriers during this talk about regulatory updates. We hear concerns about lack of harmonization. We know that there are areas where folks still want some clarity, and we want to hear about that so we can address it and continue our dialogue. But today I'd like to talk about maybe whether there are other barriers that we should be thinking about. And some of these were identified by Holverson in her paper. So one of them is skepticism. And so she identified actually two causes of skepticism. One is calling things innovation that aren't. And I just would like to note that updating an SOPE does not count as innovation. She also talked about a failure of previous initiatives that were described as innovation and how that can generate skepticism among teams. Another barrier is risk aversion. So this reminds me of another New Yorker cartoon where one gentleman says to another, "This is a really innovative approach, but I'm afraid we can't consider it. It's never been done before." So the article focused on the risk-averse nature of the federal bureaucracy, which she described as, I'm going to quote here, "designed for accountability more than flexibility." I have no comment on that, but I will just say, as I think Jason suggested this morning, that risk aversion may not be limited to the government. And I do think that risk aversion is common, especially among highly regulated industries. So the final barrier that Holverson mentioned in her paper that I wanted to highlight here is the barrier of status quo defenders. So those who have something to lose from doing something differently, either internal to an organization or external, that can disrupt efforts to try to do things innovatively. It's not all bad news. In her article, Holverson talks about lots of different ways the barriers to innovation can be overcome. And one of them is being able to demonstrate with evidence of real results the success of new ways of doing things. That was a theme of the public meeting on mitigating disruptions in clinical trials. It was a theme of the meeting on QBD and RBQM. And FDA has a real interest in companies getting these success stories and moving innovation forward. So I have listed here, in addition to all of the guidance that's been issued, a number of specific programs that CDER has to help companies implement innovative approaches. There's the Complex Innovative Trial Designs Meeting Program, which supports facilitating and advancing the use of complex adaptive, Bayesian, and other novel clinical trial designs. We heard about adaptive clinical trial designs this morning. The Advancing Real-World Evidence Program, which is focused on improving the quality and acceptability of real-world evidence-based approaches for labeling claims, including approval of new indications. And programs like these that provide the opportunity for increased interaction with FDA and advice are available. And so it's programs like these and similar efforts that industry and other stakeholders undertake that are going to be important to show what works and what doesn't in innovation. I recently heard a lecture by Dr. Janice Schwartz about a study her and her team at University of California did looking at motivators and barriers to participation in clinical trials among elderly patients with multiple chronic conditions. And in the survey that they reported on, 47% of respondents said that they would not participate in a clinical trial with study visits held by video only, and indicated a strong preference for in-person visits or a mix of in-person and video visits. I realize that there's a risk that in raising this study, I am reinforcing or validating risk aversion and skepticism. And there's obviously a lot to parse in the study, but I did want to mention it to highlight the need for research and real-life experience so we can identify which innovations really help us meet today's challenges. And that's not just for industry, it's FDA too. We heard earlier, we're still trying to figure out the best way to use RAs. We hope that with more experience, we'll be able to be more efficient and find the best use cases. But within the FDA and within industry, without experimenting, we can eliminate risk, but we don't have the opportunity to learn what may actually be better ways of doing things. So I know that you have seen this slide a few times, and my thunder was stolen here a little bit by the folks in the morning, but I'm glad that we've had the opportunity to make sure that folks get the chance to see this. So CDER has opened a docket and is holding a public meeting next month on barriers and facilitators to incorporating innovative clinical trial designs. I encourage you to scan the QR codes, provide your comments, come to the meeting. I'll be there talking about innovation again. I just want to close with a quote from a classic Disney movie, High School Musical. We're all in this together. And so as we move from developing guidance to actually implementing new approaches to the design and conduct of clinical trials, we need to continue to have an open dialogue on real and perceived barriers, take advantage of the opportunities we have to innovate so we can make strides in our shared goals of addressing unmet medical need and improving public health. And just so you have no excuse, I have all of the resources here, all of the guidances, all of the programs CDER has. So I really encourage you to take advantage of them. Thank you for your attention, and I'm going to turn it over to Hossein.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon again. So my presentation is about Health Canada Clinical Trial Compliance Program policies, guidelines, and initiatives. So I'm going to speak about my group, mandate, roles and responsibilities, scope of activities. I will talk also briefly about Canada's clinical trial regulatory framework. Can you hear me fine? Okay. And I will finish my presentation with key document for stakeholders. I'm trying to help you navigate all of these documentation or a jungle of documentation in a typical government website. So the Clinical Trial Compliance Program is one of many compliance enforcement programs in Health Canada. We are dedicated to clinical trial, and our mandate is to promote and verify compliance of drug clinical trials in Canada against the Canadian laws. So practically the Food and Drug Act and its associated regulations, in particular Part C, Division 5, which is the Canadian clinical trial regulations. With the ultimate objectives is to protect participant or enrollment in clinical trials in Canada, but also to increase the confidence in the reliability of the clinical trial results that hopefully will be submitted in market, in drug market authorization in Canada. Our inspectors, we are about 12, 13 inspectors, small team but mighty, and we have our authority to inspect based on the Food and Drug Act, Canadian Food and Drug Act, Section 23, and luckily we are allowed to inspect physical location, but also virtual and electronic locations as well. So during the pandemic, we didn't have any issue to, go to sponsors and say, like, we need to access remotely or everything you can provide us, and it is an inspection. So in Health Canada, the oversight of clinical trial is shared between two branches or two programs. One is the science program. So they receive the clinical trial application, they do the science review, and they issue the authorization. We call them the science authority. Then compliance enforcement is a different branch, and my group is within this branch, and our mandate is inspection to verify compliance. So, but we do other things, including we have authority to suspend and cancel clinical trial for non-compliance of good clinical practices. So, scope of activities, 60% of our inspection are inspection at active and ongoing clinical trials at Canadian site, investigator sites. We do also for-cause inspections. Then the other 40% of inspection are system-based inspection of sponsor and service providers. We are initiating, starting with the Bioequivalence clinical trial inspection, Canadian site and foreign sites. And we are doing also data integrity inspection for pivotal clinical trials supporting drug submissions. So we're just starting for these last two. Of course, we initiated the compliance readiness inspection, which is an inspection before a site starts recruiting subject, hoping that we reduce the likelihood of non-compliance. We are working really strongly on the international side, because we do believe that compliance enforcement needs to be also a global activity. So a lot of coordination, a lot of sharing information, but also a lot of training and joint inspections. Oops. Something wrong with this one? So it doesn't move. All right, good, thank you. The Canadian Clinical Trial Regulatory Framework. As I said, Canada's Food and Drug Act. Then we had the Food and Drug Regulations. It's not a typo. It's the Food and Drugs Act and Food and Drug Regulation. So in case you think it's a typo. During the pandemic, we worked on it, we called interim order, then we moved to permanent regulations, which is about COVID related trial, drug and medical devices. That's another framework that we added recently. In future, we are working on modernizing the clinical trial regulation. The project started to streamline all clinical trial regulation, like drug, medical device, natural health product, and even food into one big umbrella. But it was very challenging. So we are working now on a drug clinical trial. What we are trying to do is to harmonize with our international partners, but also incorporate the language and the recommendation from ICH E6. And we are hoping to have these regulations coming into force by early or mid 2026. Sorry again, it's not working. All right, so we're moving now to the part to help you navigate the documentation. So there's two main web pages or links. The one is for compliance enforcement, where you can find all of our guidance. And the second one is the place for those who are working in regulatory affairs to submit clinical trial application. That's where they found all of the forms and the application and the guidance on how to apply to conduct a clinical trial in Canada. So now I'm moving to the key document in compliance enforcement with Health Canada. So it's a one-stop for everything. We have one document that has everything about how to comply and even understand the regulatory requirements to conduct clinical trial in Canada. So this is the structure, but the key section is section 5. How we organize that? It's based on Canadian regulation. You have the statement of the provision of the article, then you have the interpretation, and the interpretation is based on ICH GCP guideline. And we refer also to other regulator documentation when necessary. And then we finish that section by providing examples of what, let's say, nice to do and what you shouldn't do. We have also references to other guidance document and the glossary. So this is how it looks when you open the PDF, but there's a web version as well. Table of content, if you go to section 5, you can see the article of regulation C05, C01. These are all referring to the particular section of the regulations. Second page, you see how a normal page would look like. You have the regulation in the gray box, then you have the interpretation, and on the third page, you have reference to other external document, and in the gray box, you have examples. The second key document, which we use to promote consistency among our inspectors, but also to, oops, I'm trying to go back, yeah. So promote consistency among our inspectors, but also to be transparent and predictable. So our stakeholders, they know what to expect when we visit them and what will happen after the inspection. So it describes how inspectors classify observation. So an observation is departure or deviation from a regulatory requirement. So when an inspector notes this deficiency or deviation, they have to risk rate it, whether it's critical, major, or minor. So, and based on the overall inspection, they gonna also rate they're going to establish whether the site is compliant or non-compliant, and if it's non-compliant, there's other regulatory action or enforcement action to take. And this guide also provide a typical example of observation, and they have observation risk 1, which are critical, major, and minor. So it's a guideline that not only we use it internally to promote consistency, but also stakeholders can use it to challenge us or even to understand exactly what to expect during an inspection. This is how it looks like in the website. You have this section, how we assign. This is the second page or another slide to explain. We have here the definition of what's critical, what's major, and on the second side you have I'm using this example, for example, the clinical trial was not always conducted according to the protocol. That's a statement from regulation. And you have what would be a critical observation, which will automatically lead to a non-compliant rating and will initiate the suspension process. And then you have what could be a risk 2 major observation and minor observation. This is like one of our key documents as well. Other important document, we have our policy, we call it Policy 30, which is the strategy for clinical trial of drugs involving human subject. This is an overarching document to explain who we are, what to do. So the purpose is to inform stakeholders about Canada's national compliance and enforcement approach for clinical trial inspection. It describes the inspection process used to verify compliance with the Act, the regulation of the activities, i.e. clinical trial related to the conduct of clinical trial performed by a regulated party at Canadian sites. So as you know, Canadian regulations apply only to Canadian soil. This is the table of content. So you can see, for example, section 4, it's clinical trial inspection. You have the risk-based site selection. That's the criteria, how we are selecting sites for inspections. This document refers also to other overarching policies and frameworks. These are for all compliance enforcement programs in Health Canada. These are interested also to know. The other key guidance document that doesn't belong to my group, but to other groups, so it's an overlap. So a Canadian clinical trial that is using an investigational product from a different country, they have to come inside Canada through the border. So these established in one of their sections, I don't remember, but you have the link. What kind of documentation you need to present to allow that investigational product in the Canadian sites? You have another document, which is the good manufacturing practices for drugs used in clinical trial. And you have another guidance document for those who wants to apply for clinical trial authorization in Canada. It gives all of the details. Now, another important element, which is aligned with the Government of Canada transparency policy. So we established a database, it's available on the website, to share with the public inside and outside Canada all of the outcome of our clinical trial inspections. So far, it includes the outcome from 2012. So what's important is what we call the inspection report cards, which provide a summary of the outcome of the inspections. And when there is an enforcement action like cancellation or suspension, it includes that as well. So this is how it looks like. So the first page is the browsing or search page. You can search by the name of the sponsor, by the location, by the drug, I think, as well. And then this is like the result of the search. And then the second page is when you hit on the inspection, you will find the sponsor name, the control number of the clinical trial, the inspection date, and the outcome or the rating. And below you will find the summary of the observation, the deviation against a section of the regulation, then a statement or generic statement. We don't provide the details, but we provide enough information. The other way is using this information, you can always approach Health Canada or through the website of the Government of Canada, and you have the Access to Information Act that allow all public to access the information of the government. So you can have the report. Of course, what we do is just we will block any personal information or any proprietary or business confidential information. But these are available. You can request them even if you are in the US or anywhere else. So that's it. So if you have any questions, there's a coordinator and submit your questions. Thank you very much. And Emily, for you. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Hossein. Thank you, Stephen. We're going to make our way out, and it's my privilege to introduce the next session, Collaboration Between Agencies and Future Expectations, and I invite Mandy to come on up and introduce that panel. Thank you, everybody.
Okay, hello everybody again. Hello to everyone here in Washington and also to everybody watching virtually. So I'm pleased to be moderating this session on the collaboration between the MHRA, the US-FDA and Health Canada and our future direction. Now we've got quite a quick turnaround. So we've got the panel Q&A session and break. So I am going to ask you to multitask during the session. So if you do have any questions, please do submit them and we will try and take as many as we can. So for this session, you can consider us the ghosts of collaboration past, present, and future. You may have recognized that we were probably planning this session in the run-up to the festive period, so there's a bit of a theme going through this one. But I am honored to introduce our presenters. And first, the lady who needs no introduction whatsoever is our Lakeisha, who we've already been introduced to and who has been coordinating this event very well so far. Thank you, Lakeisha. And also, I'd like to introduce to you all Reza Salizadeh Asl, who is the National Supervisor at Health Canada. So with no further ado, I forgot to introduce myself. So you've already met myself. I'm Mandy Budwal-Jagge. I am the head of GCP at the MHRA. So I'm so keen to get on with this presentation, as you can see. So I'm going to pass on to Lakeisha to go first.
So thank you so much, Mandy, for the introduction. And welcome again, everyone. You made it to the last session of day 2. So yay. As Mandy mentioned, I am the ghost of the global collaborations past. And during this presentation, I'm going to discuss an overview of the joint collaboration between FDA and MHRA, along with Reza and Mandy. So, can you go? Okay, common disclaimer for FDA. So, over the last 2 days, we've heard the terms joint collaboration and sharing used quite a bit. But some may wonder, what gives FDA the authority to share non-public information with our global regulatory counterparts? Well, 21 Code of Federal Regulations 20.89 does. CFR 2089 is basically the communications, it gives guidance for communications between foreign officials and government officials. Basically, this statute explains that FDA can share non-public information with foreign government officials whom perform counterpart functions to the FDA, providing a written statement establishing its authority to protect confidential commercial information from public disclosure. These written statements come in the form of cooperative arrangements, such as MOUs or similar documents, and confidentiality commitments. Even with a corporate arrangement, FDA still must have a current confidentiality commitment in place with the foreign regulatory agency to share additional information. So now I know you're wondering, because I can read your minds, but FDA has over 200 field offices throughout the United States and offices in foreign countries such as India and China. That's not enough to do your job? Well, as we've been saying most of the presentations, clinical trials are global. In fact, over 80% of applications submitted to FDA for drug and biological review contain foreign data, which means FDA must have a larger global presence to inspect and ensure public safety. So the next two slides are meant to illustrate the global coverage of CDER's GCP inspections in 22 and 23. And as you can see, there are over 100 inspections outside of the United States. This first slide depicts 2023. The next slide is 2022. Now, it's small, it's not meant for you to try to see all of the countries in it, but it is meant to show you how global FDA is with their inspections and the clinical trials. So, considering the increasing number of clinical trials outside the United States, it can create a challenge for regulators to inspect globally, which is why our collaborations with global regulators such as MHRA and Health Canada is so vital. If regulators work collaboratively to implement information exchanges, then GCP inspection resources can be used more efficiently. Shown on the slide is diverse approaches that both FDA, MHRA, and Health Canada has used to try to address the issues of the globalization. Again, I read that one. I'm ahead of myself, huh? So OSI and MHRA began meeting regularly in 2016. At this time, the objective of the collaboration was to exchange information related to GCP inspections, including inspection outcomes, meet quarterly, and conduct collaborative inspections and keep each other informed about trending issues or problem children. I didn't say that. Now I will turn it over to Reza from Health Canada to discuss the collaborations present. Thank you.
Hi, everyone, and thank you, Lakeisha. So I will, for the next few minutes, I will walk you through the current status of the collaboration between US-FDA, MHRA, and Health Canada. So Health Canada started collaborating initially with MHRA in 2018. And as Lakeisha mentioned, there was an existing collaboration between US-FDA and MHRA, which started in 2016. And we were fortunate to become part of that collaboration too in 2019. Health Canada actively participates in ongoing meetings. As a trilateral group, we meet bi-monthly, every other month. And during those meetings, we discuss risk files, the common issues that are impacting each jurisdiction. For example, if there is an inspection conducted by our partners and resulted in a negative result with critical observations that will be added to our agenda during those meetings. And the goal is to have a uniform approach to manage that risk for our own jurisdictions. Also, to avoid duplication, we share our inspection plans for each fiscal year with our partners, and this way we avoid duplication of our work. And also we take advantage of conducting joint inspections. So if there is a chance to conduct a joint inspection, we discuss those during those meetings, and we use those to deliver our inspection program and for training purposes. I should have changed the slide. Okay. This collaboration between the three agencies has given us a big opportunity to gain a better understanding of each other's inspection procedures with the objective to harmonize and align processes. This, in return, will create a greater consistency in the regulatory approach and reduces burden on you as a stakeholder. And as Lakeisha mentioned, a global trial is a global clinical trial is a global activity. Therefore, the CNE portion of it should be a global approach too. And the collaboration gives us opportunity to optimize our inspection coverage and to maximize our inspection outcome, and provides efficient use of our resources. So there are two types of collaborative inspections. One is observational, in which one regulator will conduct the inspection and the other regulator will observe the inspection. The purpose of observational inspection is to gain confidence, and it is a training opportunity and gives an opportunity to observe good practices. The other type of collaborative inspection is a joint inspection. Is in that the inspection, a joint team is formed between the two regulators, either Health Canada with US-FDA or MHRA with US-FDA, and each agency conduct their inspection following their own procedures and policies. And they enter inspection findings in their own inspection reporting system. However, the goal is to share mutual findings in order to be consistent in the outcome as much as possible. So when we conduct joint inspection, out of courtesy, we notify each other 30 days prior to commencement of the inspection. Of course, all these collaborative inspections are done in accordance to confidentiality agreement or any privacy requirements established for each jurisdiction. As I mentioned before, we share our inspection lists or inspection plans for each fiscal year with our partners to avoid duplication of our work. And also as part of collaborative work that we do, we provide training session among all three agencies. And joint workshop, and this is the most recent example of that, and it was not possible without collaboration of the three agencies. And ultimately harmonization to align our efforts to achieve our final goal, which is participant safety and integrity of data generated during the clinical trials. The final slide gives you an overview, a general overview of the collaborative inspections completed since 2016 between all agencies. This includes both joint inspections and observational inspections. I will pass the mic to my colleague, Mandina. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you, Reza. So I am going to be the ghost of collaboration future. I'm sure that's not how Charles Dickens had actually worded it, but let's give it a try. So I'm going to give you an overview and really an insight into our current thinking and where we'd like this collaboration to evolve going forwards. So following on from our successful bi-monthly meetings, which started quarterly, so I have to get used to saying bi-monthly again now, we all agreed that we could do a lot more with this collaboration. It's great from where it has started from 2016 and where it's got to now, but there's just so much more untapped potential within this collaboration. So we did have a strategy meeting in London where we had thought about what more could we do and how can we be a bit more strategic with this collaboration going forward. So we do hold these strategy meetings annually, and the most recent one was last August. And we decided that we could review our current ways of working, came up with some new ideas and initiatives, which I will go through as well, and realised that actually this is quite a big project and probably has some distinct work streams that we're going to have to work through to develop some of these ideas. Okay, so what did we discuss and what did we come up with? I promise we weren't just sitting around drinking tea. We did do some work. So what we knew is that we could probably start working with how often we meet. Now, we do try and cover so much in our meetings bi-monthly, but as we know, the work that we do is so dynamic and things change very quickly. So we probably wanted to have a look at how often do we meet and what do we discuss at those meetings. So there's some work around that within our collaboration. We already share information, as both Lakeisha and Reza have said, but what information we share and how often and how timely that information is an area that we're exploring as well. So actually it can really benefit us with our upcoming inspection plans. And that's the other thing in terms of when we share the information that we have on our inspection plans, is there an opportunity there to be able to help influence each other's inspections too? We've already heard from Steve in terms of some of our compliance strategy in the MHRA, and we've already heard in terms of our observed inspections. So another untapped potential here is inspector training and how can we develop that further. So observing inspections is one of them, but we also know that technology is evolving, the clinical research ecosystem is evolving, and we need to evolve with it, as we've heard over the past few days. So there's some work around inspector training that we can do. And another key thing is our key messaging and our stakeholder engagement and any guidance. You've heard a lot about that. You're all part of that, whether you're here in person or you're online. So how can we really make best use and how can we engage with you as our stakeholders and provide information that you need in the most suitable format? Is this the best format? And are we targeting the right audience? So that's some work that we'd like to explore. Now, a really key and important aspect to both researchers and regulators is involving the participant and the patient voice in clinical trials and making clinical trials more inclusive so that the data that's generated is really reflective of the population that those medicines are going to serve going in future. Equally, that's important to us as regulators, and we're all looking now at what's our role within that. So that's an area we'd like to explore going forward too. And I've already mentioned exploring the use of technology, not just on how industry and researchers are using technology and what kind of technology we might come across, but also what technology are we using as regulators ourselves, and can we share any of that internally too? Okay, so I'm going to go through some of these streams in a little bit more detail. You'll hear a lot of repetition, so hopefully the message will sink in. So in terms of information sharing, as I mentioned, there's sharing of the inspection plans. Can we identify also common applications, common marketing authorization applications that are being submitted to the same regulatory agencies, and can we use our resources better for that, rather than three of us coming to inspect all at different times and you're going through the same inspection process just with a different regulator? Can we be a bit more strategic in that and timely in that? So looking at those inspection opportunities, as I mentioned, whether they're observed or joint, and really sharing intelligence that we hold. So whether that's compliance history on an organisation or a recent inspection finding as well. So part of that work is really looking at how we share that information, what format that needs to be in so that it's most conducive, A, to gather that information as quickly as possible, and then to send it on to each other so it's useful to us. So in terms of inspections, as I've mentioned, we're going to be looking at the training of inspectors and common applications. but also common compliance issues. So are we all finding similar compliance or significant issues on inspection that's coming as a key theme and that we really do need to tackle together? So rather than we've identified them individually and we realize that actually individually we need to work on this issue, that actually we can come together on that, and maybe we can use that as some of our strategic messaging going forward to help drive upstream compliance, as Steve had mentioned earlier. So how can we do that, and how can we drive upstream compliance? Well, first of all, we need to identify our key messages, as I've mentioned, and one of those may be some recent compliance issues we've seen. We've heard from Emily about recent guidance, and we've also heard from a number of presenters about the ICH updates too. And then looking at which stakeholder engagement opportunities there are. So we really do hope that this event that you're all attending now, you will take home some, key learnings and distribute those within your own organisations, and you find it useful. And is this the best format, as I have mentioned, or is there a particular audience that we want to target? Is it going to be not just quality assurance and quality compliance? Is there site staff? Is it data managers? Is it clinical operations? So really being a bit more strategic, and what's the best way to reach out? Is that audience reach best via presentations? We also have blogs. So in the MHRA Inspectorate, we do have blogs as well. We've seen some of the guidance documents, or is it a paper? So that's some of the work that we're looking at. So really, what's the best format of that messaging and how to get it out to as many people as possible? So to summarise, we continue to strengthen our collaboration, and personally I think it's going from strength to strength, but I am biased in that regard. And we hope to influence compliance by being more strategic, as I said, in our key messaging and exploring opportunities for alignment and harmonisation and learning from each other. We've already heard earlier about there will be some work on risk proportionality and risk assessments and how inspectors can be aligned in terms of inspecting risk assessments as well. So there's probably lots of areas that we can focus on there too. We'll look at training opportunities and information exchange, and look at our inspection opportunities as well, and continue our collaboration in terms of inspecting. Now, on a personal note, having seen this collaboration from the start and seeing it evolved as to where it is, I'm really excited to where it can lead to in future. And I'm going to take Emily's theme of Disney films, and I did want to get this in my presentation, but I didn't think our internal communications team would approve it if I put the picture in. So I'm going to take inspiration from Toy Story and Buzz Lightyear, that I really do hope that this collaboration continues to go to infinity and beyond. So that's mine. So here is a picture of some of us who, when we met in London, there were, of course, a number of colleagues who joined remotely, and I'd like to thank each and every one of our colleagues who contribute to and strengthen this collaboration. Okay, so before I go to questions and I just conclude, I'm going to, I know we have a few minutes left, we're running ahead of schedule. So to those of you celebrating, happy Valentine's Day, or as I have learned today, it's called Love Day too. So on that theme, I'm going to be really cheesy and corny right now and ask questions of my colleagues on, so if I ask you first, I'll go to you first, Lakeisha, and then to you, Reza, of what do you love about this collaboration?
So my mic doesn't work, so. Mandy, how much time do we have? Because I could honestly go on and on and on. As you, I have been with the collaboration since inception, and so I have watched it blossom into what it is today, starting from our first 2018 joint conference of 200 people, 2,000 people, to what we have today. That's what I love. I love interacting with my foreign counterparts. I love the diversity that they bring, and I love learning so much from them, because it's really an honor to be able to learn with from everyone. So do I have about 10 more minutes to go with my loves, or?
Keep going.
So I would love to pass it to Reza.
Thanks, Lakeisha. I say, what's there not to love? I love every aspect of it. It is, and in the past 2 days, I think we have showcased that how well these all three agencies work well together and how closely we work with each other to make this happen. It took a lot of work. I be very honest with you. I know Lakeisha worked for the past year or more, working very hard. So I love every aspect of it. But my most, the part that I like the most are the joint inspections, because the joint inspection, it gives a opportunity to learn good practices from each other, from other agencies, and work together collaboratively, and also I think it's very good for industry too, because they see, okay, we are harmonizing our expectations, right? So you deal with one, it's like you're dealing with other agencies too. Thank you.
Thank you both. God, it's going to be hard to follow. So it's only fair that I share what I love about this collaboration. And for me, it has to be the amazing and talented colleagues, present and past, that have really been part of this collaboration and are so driven to a very common goal of, driving best practice to really put the participants and patients first and generate great data from these trials, and really wanting to collaborate, not just with us, but with stakeholders too, to try and, keep up in the bar of the quality of the trials that are being conducted. So I'd like to thank you all, and a personal thank you to Lakeisha, because I don't think that this collaboration could have got to where it is today without the immense hours and support of yourself. So thank you, and to each and every one of our colleagues. And a final thank you and appreciation to all of you all for your attention during this session, as well as to you all online. We do hope that you found it useful and you have gained some insight into our current thinking. So I think we're running ahead of schedule, so you all get a bit of a longer break, and we're due to come back at 3 o'clock. So thank you all.
I love saying that.
I also just wanted to say, during the registration, when folks were signing up for this symposium, we received probably in the order of 500 or so questions and comments for today and yesterday, as well as tomorrow. So these 3 days of this symposium. Additionally, we've received probably on the order of maybe 100 or so questions from folks over the course of the day. So we really appreciate your involvement and your interest and attention to the speakers, and hopefully we can provide a little additional clarity today. So first, I'd like to introduce back to the stage. We have, I'm just going to go with first names. So we have Adil, Barbara, and Jason. All their information is on the bio sheet, so I won't go through the introductions. And that will lead us to our questions. All right, so this question is for Adil. So are the definitions of adaptive design trials standardized across all health authorities?
Not quite sure. I guess this was addressed at the last slide of my presentation, where it was stated that currently there is no full harmonization between some regulators per the ICH.
Next, for Barbara. So the questioner sees sites, especially in the USA, restricting sponsors to conduct on-site monitoring, which allows only once or twice a year on-site visits. How can sponsors comply with their monitoring plans? And can you address challenges to identify non-compliance or issues at the site level, which may require on-site review? For example, IP accountability, missing safety points like adverse events and serious adverse events, et cetera. This is a huge risk for trials with new technologies, novel trials, and early stage trials. And before Barbara answers, I'll just say this was a common question that I saw on a few different sessions. So I think everyone will appreciate Barbara's response.
Yeah, I think we got this question several times from this session. It is a problem, right? To be able to monitor a trial, you have to be able to access the information. And while remote monitoring it can be used to perform a lot of the oversight, there are some things that still need to be done in person, right? So how are you going to assure that the pharmacy and the drug accountability is going to be handled appropriately if you don't have access to see the pharmacy and the storage conditions of the investigational product? If you aren't able to see the equipment and the facilities, how can you determine that they're fit for the trial? So particularly in the site selection process, it's going to be important to be able to look at the systems, look at the equipment, look at the facilities, and determine that they're adequate to meet the requirements of the trial. So if the facility is going to restrict access, there are ways to work around that part of the time, but a complete ban in on-site activities is going to be impractical for most trials, I believe. It depends, right? We're saying that all the time. It depends on the trial. It depends on the data that's being collected, how it's being collected, where it's being stored. But I think for your typical trial, there are going to be some things that have to be done in person, on-site, at least initially, and possibly at the close of the trial. So I think it's a very important part of the site selection criteria for each of the sites that are engaged in the trial. And then at that point, after site selection, it becomes probably less critical that you're actually able to be on site for all of the oversight activities. So if you're in a situation where you had authority to go on site and visit the facility to perform monitoring, and that permission was lifted from you, or you were restricted from going to the site sometime during the course of the trial, I think the best thing to do is to kind of work with the site and first verify, are there any conditions that we can meet that would satisfy the concerns that you have? So during the pandemic, our international inspection team was doing a lot of inspections in facilities in person. And there was a lot of back and forth in our pre-announcement for those inspections with the facilities, talking about what special provisions or controls would you like us to meet in order to come on site and look at the data. So whether it was providing a negative test for our inspector before they arrived on site, if it meant that we were going to be working in a large conference room with the data broadcast on a screen, as opposed to sitting side by side looking at laptop computers in order to get that social distancing in, right? So we can do that. If you want us to tour the facilities after patient care hours, we can do that. We don't have to be in the clinic exposing patients, to additional risk. We can wait until after hours to verify that the equipment and the facilities meet needs for the trial. But let's work on what we can do, what restrictions you would like to work within in order to reduce the risk to your patient population, but still meet the needs of the trial. So again, I think part of it is a negotiation with the site, I guess, when you're setting up your sites, and when the situation changes over the course of the study, do what you can to work that out, and just make sure that you're meeting the needs of the study, verifying the data that has to be verified. And you can work with them for as much of that can be done remotely as possible. And I just want to see if Jason has anything to add to that from their experience.
I'd earmark this one as a question for the next session, actually, but I'll pick it up now. In the UK, there's something called the Model Clinical Trial Agreement, which investigator sites and sponsors are required, encouraged, in inverted commas, to use. And in there's a requirement to permit that. So I took a quick image of the wording, but it says the trial site shall permit the monitor and any auditor or inspector access to all relevant data of the participants for monitoring. Such access to be on site or via remote means be arranged at mutually convenient times and on reasonable notice. The reason for bringing it up is, in essence, it's in a contract at the beginning. So a good place to start, much as you don't necessarily want to jeopardize the relationship with the site, is there is a contract in place and there is a requirement to be able to go on site and do this, and particularly in response to the question here, where there are potential compliance issues and this kind of thing. that would start to worry me if somebody's saying, you can't come. I'm not going to let you on site. Well, all right, okay, but let's understand why that is. Is there a real need to do so because something's going on at the site? You know, you're up to the eyeballs in COVID patients and everything's locked down and this kind of thing? Or is it more that actually something's happened and you don't want me there for whatever reason it is, and you're just going to hope that I'm going to trust your data and I can make life more convenient by you not coming? So I do think it comes back to, how are you working with the site? Is there a reason for you to go? And if there is, then fine. Have you exhausted all of your other methods for working with them? So there's a finite amount you can do by remote monitoring of records and this kind of thing. But if it's for cause, and if it's these records which you can't easily get to in other ways, or in some respects, even if it's just to go and kick the tires a little bit, because we know that you can see different things if you're there in person versus whether it's just sitting at home looking at your big screen. And ultimately, if the output is, you still can't come, we're not going to let you on site, we're not going to give you access to anything, then that's when you start to need that harder conversation of, well, if not, why not? And are you still a site for us as a sponsor? You know, as an inspector, I have the ability to demand, in inverted commas, that you allow me on site. But as an auditor, as a monitor, you don't necessarily have the same. You end up having to use that power of, well, perhaps we don't want you as a site anymore, so perhaps we'll pause your recruitment while we get to a point where you can let me come, or perhaps we don't allow further studies. But I also think it comes back to your site selection. I think you need to be really clear about when and where you do remote monitoring, or when you do on-site versus remote monitoring, and the same with audits. And that way it's harder for the site to say no. But I understand the burden for investigators and their staff, you know, and these days they're ever busier in terms of how they're working, what they need to work with. So it's the right balance. And if you use the hammer at the beginning, then you're not going to end up with a good relationship, and that relationship is important.
I did want to ask that one thing that may not be considered in some of these is involvement of the institution in the site selection. So it's maybe the investigator making that decision that you can't come on site, but it could also be the institution. So it may be that there's a need to involve the institution in that negotiation during that site selection process. Just anything else to add?
No, I'm good, thank you.
Thank you. You have a lot of knowledge and experience at the table here, so we appreciate your insights on that. So Jason, I'm going to go back to you. What are the expectations for a risk-based audit plan in relation to specific clinical trial projects? So more specifically, which types of audits, for example, investigator site audits, TMF, CSR audits, clinical database audits, should the sponsor foresee, and how many should they, expect to be requested? And what are the key variables included in these types of evaluations?
The temptation to give a hard number and say that's how many you should do. It's important to understand what the trial is and what you're trying to do with the trial. What are your key data points? What do you need to ensure to protect the trial participants, to ensure data integrity, all of these kind of things. And it's that which guides the audits you need to do, and equally how many audits you need to do. You do the first audit and it throws out some issues. So perhaps you go and do some more, you follow your nose a little bit. If you start to assign, we only do these audits and we only do this finite number of things, then does that fully allow you to explore the issues which may be associated with that trial? So I can't give you a number, and I can't really tell you exactly what you need to go and look at. It will depend on a trial by trial basis. I don't know if anybody else wants to add to that.
Thank you. So we have a little over 2 minutes, and we'll try to get through as many questions as we can. So I have one for Adil. This may have been on your slide. So with respect to sponsor oversight, you had on a slide that committees recruited should have SOPs. Does this apply to third-party vendors and service providers as well? And if so, could this be addressed via a contract?
Thank you. Now, when we talk about tasks that third-party vendors are conducting, what's important here is that the tasks are laid out in a written document. That's very important. It doesn't have to be an SOP per se, as long as these tasks are laid out in detail in a written document. I'll give you an example. So if I'm conducting an inspection, I find there is a contract between the sponsor and a third party. I want to see what the third party is doing, and whatever they're doing, if it's laid out in detail in a document, then I'm fine with it. At times I find the contract has a supplementary document with it called Schedule of Task, and this lays out all the tasks that the third-party company is conducting for the sponsor. So I'm fine with that. I don't really have to see the SOPs of the third party. As long as the tasks are all laid out, detailed in a document, written document, then it should be fine. Thank you. Barbara, do you want to add anything?
Thank you, Adil.
Thank you.
For Barbara, what is the investigator's responsibility in overseeing vendors that investigator site is using, for example, for calibrating equipment? Or is this still ultimately a sponsor's responsibility?
I'll be quick with this. ICH E6R3, section 3.6.6. The sponsor should provide information to the investigator on any service provider identified by the sponsor to undertake any activities under the responsibility of the investigator. The responsibility for such activities remains with the investigator. That makes it a little difficult, but yeah, so the sponsor should inform the investigator. The investigator has an obligation to oversee those tasks in the collection of data assigned to the investigator.
Thank you. And with 20 seconds left, I think I'll go to a short one maybe, and this one's for Jason. I want to give everybody enough time for each session. So Jason mentioned the UK clinical trials legislation. Is there any update on when this might be published?
I think I can hit the time limit. Sometime this year is the answer.
Perfect. Thank you. All right, I'm going to ask Jason to stay on the stage and invite the session 2 folks down. And thank you again to the session 1 speakers. All right, so our session 2 folks joining me on the stage are Jason, Jennifer, and Richard. All right, so maybe since Jason just responded to a question, I'll start with Rick, if you don't mind. So Rick, is there any tool, or could there be, where frequent findings are listed? This could be useful for risk assessment and focus metrics.
Yeah, good question. We do have a biomed inspection metrics page. It's just on fda.gov. Just go search for it. Looks like it has metrics current as of fiscal year 22 right now. And it's kind of nice. It has an overall summary for each year, and then a split into 43 observation trends, split into IRBs, GLPs, CIs, and sponsors. Thank you.
Jennifer, I have a combination question. We had some that were somewhat similar, so I'm going to try to combine these. So you talked obviously a lot about CSIs and gave some examples. So how many CSIs did Health Canada do during the pandemic, and how many have they done since? And can you also comment on the frequency, or I guess maybe that question is about like a proposed proportion of CRIs that will be conducted? What percentage of sponsors, studies, or qualified investigators may receive such an inspection? And then there was also a question about whether sponsors or qualified investigators can make requests for CRIs, and if that may help them to avoid noncompliance, so more of like an educational aspect to an inspection.
So they're CRIs, Compliance Readiness Inspection. I'm not part of the crime unit.
My apologies, my apologies.
So yeah, the answer is kind of combines all those, so that's why it's good to ask it as a combined question. In regards to the number of CRIs, percentage-wise of our total inspections, it's about 10%. It was higher during the pandemic because we were halting some of our other inspections. So it's a risk-based approach when we do a CRI, the decision to do it being based if it's a benefit to the regulated party that we're going to inspect, and if there's a likelihood of non-compliance. And we don't control the number of clinical trial applications that the Review Bureau is getting. So if they get a lot with a lot of new sponsors, new qualified investigator sponsors, then we would have based on our risk-based approach, we'd have a higher likelihood to be doing those, so our numbers could be higher, et cetera. But for now, the CRIs make up a small proportion of our total inspections and compliance verification activities that we conduct. And in regards to can we request, can a party request that? For sure, you can request a CRI. Proactive regulated parties are welcome. And we're happy that the introduction of these CRIs has been met with such enthusiasm and positive feedback. When we first started doing them, we were sending out surveys and seeing how the regulated parties were taking them. So we're happy to expand on them, as mentioned, into other areas beyond the COVID realm, because of it being developed during the pandemic. So I think that answered the frequency, numbers, percentages. Yes, questions?
Thank you. So Jason, back to you and back to monitoring, on-site monitoring. So, you gave a very full response in the previous session, but this questioner asked, specifically about ICH E6R3 supporting remote activities such as audits and SDVs. There was concern about weakening the sponsor's position of mandating on-site visits to investigate serious issues. That is, things like repeated non-compliances or serious breaches. So could you comment a little further on agency expectations with regards to sites allowing physical access to sponsor representatives to conduct these activities?
I think any site that fundamentally turns around and says you can't come, full stop, I think has probably got something that they're potentially trying to hide rather than something else. It's understanding and working with them. And as Barbara said earlier on, it's very much understanding as an organisation why they don't want you to come and whether or not that sounds reasonable. And potentially escalating that away from just the investigator's team. It might be the investigator and his team doesn't have the capacity to manage lots of on-site visits and audits and that kind of thing. And that's more of a resource issue. So then that's potentially up to Research Governance Office, R&D, whatever you want to call it, within the organisation, within the hospital, to see whether or not they can help support the investigator through. I don't believe that E6 weakens the position. I think if anything, it gives options, and I think options are important. The less people on the site that while they're doing the routine reviews using electronic health records and things, so much the better in some respects, because it allows other people to turn up and do the on-site bits that they do need to do. Like I said, I think it comes back to contracts. I think it comes back to understanding why that is. And ultimately, if you really can't get it to work and you really cannot get on site, then that's trying to work out what you do next, whether it's restricting their activities, speaking to your regulator, speaking to potentially to the ethics committee. I don't know. It depends on where you are in the world and how that functions.
Thank you. Next question is for Rick. What are the 2024 plans for FDA to complete GCP inspections of sponsors, CROs, and investigator sites, more specifically in India? The questioner also asked, for MHRA and Health Canada opinions. So if you folks have any responses to that, we'd be open to hearing it.
Yeah, sure. For FDA OBIMO, it's steady as she goes for India work. We're application driven over there. It's predominantly BEQ. Don't see a whole lot of sponsor clinical investigator sites over there, but yeah, we will continue our generous workload over there.
And any comment from Jason or Jennifer?
I need to say something similar, driven by need, really, and then we'll have our inspection program for bioequivalence, which will include sites in India.
Yeah, ditto with our expansion for bioequivalent studies.
Next question is for Jennifer. This is also kind of a combination question. So are CRI inspections yielding more compliant sites and therefore more compliant sponsors? And why are reports not generated for CRIs and CAPAs required? And what action results from these CRIs?
Interesting question for if they're yielding more compliant sites. We're having an internal discussion on that of kind of what metrics to evaluate the effectiveness of a CRI. Could it be fewer observations, lower risks as compared to our regular inspections? Perhaps, as I say, it's still ongoing. We don't really have enough, I would say, data as well to kind of confirm that or deny that hypothesis. And then in regards to why we don't do reports, this is a no data collection type, no data review inspection. We're aiming to help the regulated party comply with the regulations, GCP and whatnot. It's a collaborative type approach. So sending them a report to have to respond to doesn't seem very collaborative. It's also more of a learning inspection. It's a compliance promotion aspect. But the goal is still the same. We want to ensure the regulated parties are better prepared to meet their requirements and likelihood of non-compliance. Although we don't formally request a CAPA, we still hope that they take the findings that we mentioned during the closing meeting and take action accordingly. And also they're free to take their own notes and write down the findings. We're not stopping them from that, even though we're only giving them verbally. And actions from CRIs, as mentioned, if we're finding a lot of findings and thinking there's a risk for non-compliances in the future, we can recommend a regular inspection be conducted in the future, and we'll add that to our risk-based site selection list.
Thank you. Next question's for Jason. This morning, the term regression was used in regard to novel clinical trial approaches post-pandemic. The questioner felt that was probably a fair assessment. Investigator oversight is key to a compliant trial and should be emphasized more so in R3, but decentralized models can make oversight and even documented involvement by a CI, PI a challenge. So can your agency speak to any challenges encountered with regards to investigator oversight and alternative models? And could this be behind any of that regression or hesitancy that you referred to?
I think the word I used was reticence, but regression probably works too. The investigators have a lot to deal with, and I think it comes back to an earlier question as well, which I think Adil answered about almost things being given to the investigator. I think that it comes down to working with the investigator to work out what will work for them in terms of providing tools, providing research nurse support, healthcare at home, whatever it might be, to enable that particular type of trial. We've seen a number of examples where investigators are sort of told, the sponsors provided a service, some support, whatever it is, and told the investigator that this is how it will be. Whereas there's no guarantee that will actually work with how that investigator wants to work and the processes that they have established. So these kind of trials, there's loads of moving parts, and we were talking about that earlier on. So if there's loads of moving parts, then just by adding more and more complexity when potentially the investigator doesn't need or want that, doesn't make life any easier for the investigators. So you can sort of see why potentially they might step away from doing some of those if they're being given more and more to do and less ability to keep a hand on what's actually happening. More things are pushed away. Do they still have the ability to understand what's happening? Are they totally reliant on the sponsor or totally reliant on another organisation to tell them that things are okay? Whereas previously they'd have it all under their roof.
Thank you. And I think that's time for session 2. So thank you again for your talks, and we really appreciate it. And I'll call up our session 3 folks next. So we've got Jen, Jennifer, and Mandy joining us. All right, so I'm going to start with a question for Jen from FDA. In what phase of a marketing application are FDA, or I guess the stage of review for a marketing application, are FDA inspections usually conducted?
That is a very good question. Thank you. FDA's mission, or CDER's mission, is to make sure we have safe and effective drugs available to the public, to American people. So we have review division, CDER, they review different aspects of the drug safety and efficacy, but are the data reliable, can be used to support the indication in the application. So that's our mission is to make sure the study are conducted according to the investigational plan and the data are reliable to be used. So to do this, we have GCP inspections, we select a clinical investigator, sometimes use risk-based approach to sponsor CRO inspections. So after application submitted, we select selections, we send out inspections, and we review the reports, and we send the recommendation back to the review division. That's after the application is submitted. However, during any time during the drug development phase, if you hear any complaints or any GCP concerns from any sources, FDA will send out inspectors for inspections.
Thank you, Jen.
Thank you.
Now this is for Jenna, and I apologize. Jennifer, but I know you like Jenna. With international privacy and data sharing concerns in mind, would it be prudent to ensure that trial participants are consenting to data sharing access to allow for potential RRAs in the future?
So thank you, first off, whoever submitted this question. The answer is yes, that would be very convenient. You, as Rachel Mead from MHRA mentioned in her presentation recorded earlier today, you should be prepared for a remote inspection at all times. And so we had a number of conversations in our feasibility discussions with clinical investigator sites, and they had a number of discussions with their ethics committees and data protection officers about the specific language that was existing in consent forms that were never designed for remote transfer of data, and that specifically define that subject records can be reviewed by FDA during an on-site inspection, but don't address electronic transfer of those records to participate in a remote regulatory assessment. So I think part of preparedness for the potential of an RRA coming down in the future could potentially include inclusion of language about remote regulatory assessments and electronic transfer of data that's required to participate in those in informed consent documents kind of going forward.
Thank you, Jenna. Next, and I forgot to point out that Mandy is sitting in for Rachel, who is our remote speaker. So we really appreciate your willingness to do so. So Mandy, this question's for you and for MHRA. So in order to achieve remote monitoring of study patient records, sites are giving access to electronic health records. In general, evaluating validation of these systems isn't feasible. So does MHRA generally accept these electronic health records as fit for purpose if they require unique credentials to log in? And is there a clear electronic signature or time date attributability?
So thank you for this question. We in the MHRA have actually released a position statement on electronic health records because we were finding issues on inspections of this move to electronic health records, but they hadn't really considered the GCP aspect of those. So a lot of electronic health records were scanned images, maybe in black and white, or half the page was missing and they weren't really in order. So we experienced issues on inspection. So of course we thought, well, this must be impacting monitoring and auditing as well. So we released a position statement on that, working within the NHS on what the expectations were in terms of this GCP also needs to be considered. That being said, the electronic health record is the investigator institution system, and they should already have mechanisms to sort of validate their own system. And we're not expecting you to go and validate their system for them and do an additional validation, but actually to go and do your own assessment, probably at site selection, to see what the system looks like and is it fit for purpose for what you need in order to conduct the trial. And if you do identify issues there, to make sure that there's workarounds around that. This is also covered in the ICH E6R3 update, making it really clear in terms of what are the investigators' computerized systems and responsibility of the investigator or institution versus what is the sponsor's responsibility. So that's been really clearly outlined in ICH E6R3 in the current draft.
Thank you, Mandy. The next question I have is for Jen and FDA. So have there been any regulatory actions taken as a result of negative RRA outcomes?
That's a good question. Yeah, thank you for the question. Actually, thank you for paying attention to my presentation, because I mentioned in the presentation that doesn't matter if it's inspection or RRA, as long as we have objectionable findings, observations, and then regulatory action will be taken. So yes, we have, but I cannot disclose the details because the RA results are not posted by FDA yet. So yes, we have.
Thank you. Next question is for Jenna. It's the questioner's understanding that when FDA collects, and you stated this in your talk, that when FDA collects documents from clinical sites, it's the questioner's understanding that when the FDA collects documents from clinical sites that they cannot be redacted. So why are documents shared for an RRA redacted?
Yeah, so I wanted to address this because I think this perhaps is maybe a common misunderstanding. So it's actually not true. A lot of times on our international inspections, the records that we collect are redacted in order for our clinical sites to be in compliance with their local laws. So we would not, as representatives of FDA, ever instruct you to do something knowingly that would violate your local law. We may not know always your local law, but commonly, we are told by our clinical investigator sites, I must redact this record as I provide it to you for an exhibit in order to be in compliance, not just in the EU, but also increasingly in other countries in the world, Australia, Japan, South Korea, just off the top of my head from recent experience. And then documents collected via an RRA, we do ask sites to consider redacting specifically because of the way that they are transferred to us electronically. So FDA doesn't have the capability of an in-house portal. We use a third-party service, which is Box.com, encrypted service at this time for the collection of those electronic records. And there are inherent risks in the scanning and uploading of those documents that you don't have when you're being given a physical hard copy on site. And so we ask that those be redacted before they're submitted to us.
Thank you. Next question for Mandy is to discuss any process to share results of inspections or remote assessments with other regulatory agencies. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so as I alluded to in the presentation earlier, we share inspection findings where it's relevant to the other countries. So we do that as part of our collaboration, and that would include whether we've done a remote, on-site or hybrid inspection.
Thank you. A question for Jen. The questioner was interested in Health Canada and FDA's immediate response in adapting to COVID-19. So while Health Canada created a more focused approach and application of remote compliance assessment and inspections, FDA's RRA version didn't appear to be as targeted or focused. I think Jen used the term whenever when discussing FDA determining whether or not to conduct an RRA. So how can sponsors prepare to work with FDA on RRAs?
Thank you. This is a great question. I'd like to thank to the person who asked this question because, sorry, if I have caused any confusion. So in my presentation, I talk about when FDA may request RRA. The question is whenever, if RRA we believe is appropriate for GCP oversight. However, in my presentation, I did not talking about the scope and the focus of RRA. Yes, we agree with Health Canada that the RRA should be focused and should if you agree with FDA to have a RRA, and we should be able to provide you the focus and the scope of the RRA and the schedule of meetings, the details, should be focused.
Thank you. And another question for Jenna. During RRAs or on-site inspections, does FDA obtain access to TMFs or electronic records without having to view them over the shoulder? If not, are there plans to make this access to electronic records a requirement?
So this is a recent change in our procedures. We were previously not able to have direct access to any electronic systems over the course of an inspection, but that has actually since changed. Specifically for BIMO inspections, we're able to obtain direct access provided we're given assurances that our access is read-only, and we're provided an assistant essentially to describe the layout and format of those records.
Thank you. And with time about to run out, I think I'm going to move on to session 4, and we're going to give them an opportunity to answer some questions. So thank you all very much. So I'd like to call up folks from session 4. We have Emily, Stephen, and Hossein joining us. Hello. Thanks. All right, so I'm going to start with a question for all 3 of our panelists. Is there a plan for creating a more collaborative culture between industry and the regulators? And since Emily is just to my right, I'll start with Emily.
Okay, great, thanks. I feel a little bad, like I hope this question came in before my slides showing all the ways that we're trying to collaborate. And I assume that they mean beyond this meeting here today, which I think is a great opportunity for industry and regulators to interact. But, you know, all kidding aside, to say that there's a plan for a more collaborative culture, I think we're already doing a lot of collaboration through this meeting, through other meetings that aren't just regulators, but obviously have industry involved as well. I did show a slide with all of the different programs CEDAR has with opportunities for industry to come in, and it's not just sponsors, it's also patient advocates and other stakeholders. We really do want to hear from you, and I know that it's for other regulators as well, that there's a lot of opportunities to engage in dialogue and collaborate so that we can help move things forward.
And if Stephen or Hossein has any comments, anything to add to that, you're welcome to.
Yeah, I think events like this are, a good example of driving collaboration. I think it's very much as well the cultural shift that we're just not here transmitting and you receiving, that we get that loop of challenge and question coming back to us and vice versa, so we can actually engage and discuss issues, initiatives, etc. And then also I think of from our perspective as well, and I guess from yours, of making sure we're engaging with the right people. It was a big thing when I was in industry of, commercially, are we speaking to the decision makers and making sure that how we're interacting is that the messaging is getting to the right people to help you to facilitate change, and also to make sure that we're receiving the messages from you that will then facilitate change with the way that we work. So there's plenty of opportunities and initiatives, and I think we just need to get that sort of cultural trust and collaboration part moving forward, and then I think a lot of it will sort itself out.
Thank you. I agree with Emily and Steve. So collaboration is fundamental, of course, and in Health Canada, this is what we do, and if there is room for improvement, of course, we can improve. Just to give you an example, all of our guidance and policies, whether they are clinical trial or any other health matter like GMP or cannabis or anything else, we do it in a consultation mode. So we engage our stakeholders, we share with them the draft, we collect comment, we address all of them, we meet with them face to face, like we are doing everything that we can do to increase collaboration and to be at least meet the expectation of the industry. So at this moment, I can say that we're happy with the level of collaboration, but if there is a room to improve, why not? Thank you.
Thank you. Next question is for Stephen. The questioner asked, what is upstream intervention at MHRA?
So it's an intervention that's upstream. So
very much clearer.
Yeah. So I guess if we think about interactions with the site or an organisation in isolation, we have an inspection, and that's when we see you and you see us. And then the sort of classic interaction would be we do an inspection, we may or may not cite issues, and then the site goes away, fixes it, and then we come back again and we find something else, and then we go away and we come back again. So the way we look at the upstream intervention is can we help and improve compliance by the way we engage before that inspection cycle? So for instance, an event like this, or stakeholder groups. So one thing that we're looking at with our strategy is that, okay, if we do an event like this or a specific event, how effective is the messaging? Is it getting to the right people? Are we saying the right things to help improve compliance, or are we just transmitting what we want? And so we need to work out how we can measure the effectiveness of those engagements, and also looking at other routes to try and help and improve compliance, whether it's from blogs on the internet or working with specific organisations or trade bodies that may have an influence over a sector with training or education, just so that we can try and use all of the tools and levers that we've got that can help improve compliance without it just being an inspection and a report, in that there may be other routes of how we can communicate a message that will help compliance improve over time with organisations.
Thank you, Stephen. Hossein, the questioner asked, is there an updated timeline for the regulatory modernization of Division 5 regulations?
Yes, there's tentative timelines. We're hoping that by early 2026, the new regulation will be coming into force. However, this can change because they're not firm yet, but at worst could be spring or fall 2026. Thank you.
And additionally, Hossein, the questioner asked about GUI 0100 and whether it was expected to be updated with the ICHR3 updates.
Absolutely. All of our guidance document, including Guide 100, will be updated based on new regulation or with the publication and the adoption of the ICH E6 R3. And of course, we will do it in a collaboration way with the industry. And with the I'm pretty sure for the ICH E6 R3, there will be a training session in Canada to our stakeholders. And also with the new regulation, at least 6 months before coming into force, we will start training, meeting with industry, doing all of this compliance promotion to make sure that they understand the new requirement, but also to help them comply quickly and also help our industry to build that relationship to make sure that the new regulation will be successful. Thank you.
Thank you. From our registrants, we did get a few questions that I noticed earlier this morning about whistleblower protections. I will open that up to Stephen in a second, but I just want to say, I'm a team leader in our compliance oversight branch, so we field a lot of, we call them complaints or referrals from a variety of sources, and we handle a lot of the directed and for cause inspections. I think there's a different understanding of what a whistleblower is in a lot of areas of the world. I think what I'll say is for FDA, I would just direct anyone who has questions about whistleblowers and whistleblower protections to look at our website for the Department of HHS, so Health and Human Services. In particular, the Office of the Inspector General has some good information on definitions for what a whistleblower is and what the types of protections for whistleblowers exist. So if there is interest in that, you can look to that website for more information. But I'd love to open it up to Stephen or Hossein if they have any other additional comments about whistleblowers.
Yeah, I mean, we've got a very similar position that we'd say, please look at our website, because there are ways people can contact the agency with complaints or blowing the whistle, and there are protections that are in place. So certainly at the MHRA, if we do receive anything like that, there are SOPs and there's ways of working that will protect the identity of whoever's approached us with information, and we have some very strict guidance that we need to follow, which takes it all the way through if we do need to do an inspection of just how that's managed to protect any sources of information. And I think equally the wider piece on this is just, things go wrong or things don't quite go according to plan, and it just comes back to this, how do we communicate between ourselves from an organisational point of view as well. So obviously in the UK we've got serious breach reporting systems for clinical trials, where it's laid down in our regulations with definitions of when a sponsor should contact us and then discuss it. And I think the important thing here is that it's not just a kind of linear thing that happens, that something goes wrong, you tell us, and then we decide what we're going to do to you. There's an awful lot of work that say Mandy's team will put in when we get these reports from organisations. We'll then work with the company. Okay, there may be some regulatory issues, but for example, if there's a problem with an IMP, the consideration will still be the participant or the patient of what the impact is on them and how the best way to manage that care is, while still maintaining the regulatory oversight of it. So this isn't a kind of policing action that happens. It's just identifying issues and then working out how we protect the patients and also make sure that we maintain the regulatory oversight and making sure that everything's reliable and everything's in order. So I think that's an important thing as well. We're not talking about telling tales and then teacher coming and disciplining. It's about, yes, it's gone wrong, how do we fix it? And then, yes, how do we stop it happening again? So I think that's a really important message when we go back to the whole culture and collaboration piece as well.
Thank you.
Yeah, nothing to add. I think we are aligned with the MHRA and the FDA. We're covered. Thank you.
And I think that's it for session 4. Thank you very much. Finally, to wrap this up, keeping you all from wherever you're headed next, is session 5. I'd like to invite Mandy, Lakeisha, and Reza up. So first question will go to Lakeisha. Does FDA share full inspection reports, or are the reports redacted before being shared with MHRA or Health Canada?
Yeah, great question. So we do share our inspection reports and other documents with MHRA and Health Canada. Within CEDAR, they are sent for clearance first. Sometimes they are redacted depending on what's in the report, but the full inspection report is sent for clearance before it's shared. So sometimes, yes, it is redacted.
Thank you, Lakeisha. And Reza, what's been the most significant impact of the trilateral relationship?
The most significant impact of the trilateral relationship is to align our efforts by working together towards achieving our common objective, is to ensure participant safety and integrity of the data generated during the clinical trial. And also, this is collaboration is extremely cost effective too.
Very much. Agreed. Mandy, will there be more harmonized guidance coming from the 3 agencies?
Okay, great question again. So one big piece of harmonized guidance that's coming out, which all 3 agencies are part of, is the ICH E6R3 update. And I know that just doesn't just involve us, but all the ICH regions in that. But this is like an aim and a goal going forward in terms of which areas can we harmonize more on. And even when we do produce guidance, and even if it is individually, you know, we do talk to each other. We do get a feel for what's your current thinking on this. And we're pretty much aligned on that already. So if you think of the big themes in each of our guidances, the big themes are very much aligned, and they all come back to data integrity and protecting the participants and public health.
Thank you. Lakeisha, you're up next. You mentioned FDA's authority to share documents comes from 21 CFR 20.89. Could you go over any differences between CFR and MOUs and CAs and CCs? And maybe remind everybody what some of those mean.
Okay, sure, yeah. So the CFR, which is the Code of Federal Regulation, which I did mention in my presentation, is the statute that gives up federal agencies the authority to do certain things, which we must follow. Within the CFR, as I mentioned, there is a statement that says there must be a written agreement in place for FDA to share information, and that's where the CA, which is the cooperative arrangement, comes in. The CA within the FDA is the cooperative agreement that we use to share information. The cooperative arrangement is also sometimes called an MOU, so there are other names for it, but the big point of it is that it's a written understanding that FDA can establish with one or more foreign government or international partner that describes the willingness and good faith of intentions of FDA and its counterparts to engage in cooperative activities. Now, with that being said, the CC that you mentioned, which is called the confidentiality commitment, it is a document that sets the legal framework for FDA to share certain kinds of non-public information with FDA counterparts in foreign countries. So although we may have a corporate arrangement with a company, with MHRA and Health Canada, we also have to have a CC, which is a confidentiality commitment in place to share documents.
Thank you. Mandy, you're up next. With all the sharing and the love you referred to between the agencies, do you also envision there will be more joint inspections going forward?
Yes, so I certainly hope so. That is the aim. I think we've mentioned it in the presentation already of how can we utilize our experience and our resource more effectively? How can we have that wider reach? So that's definitely the direction of travel and an area that we're exploring. And you saw on the graph there as I presented of how many we did pre-pandemic, and then of course we had that big blip, if we're going to go with the Avengers theme, that happened. And now it's about let's ramp that back up and see how we can move forward with joint inspections again.
Thank you. I'm going to go back to Lakeisha and ask if FDA goes to a CRO to inspect the TMF for an NDA pre-approval inspection. Man, we love our acronyms, don't we? And the CRO is located in the UK. Will MHRA be notified? If yes, is there a potential that MHRA and FDA inspectors show up together during the inspection?
Thank you, Ryan, for that question. The short answer is yes. So within the Office of Regulatory Affairs, when we conduct inspections in foreign countries, they do notify the authority within that country as a courtesy, just to inform them that we will be there. It's typically we try to give at least 30 days, but of course with the foreign travel planning, sometimes that can change. But overall, yes, we do try to give at least a 30-day notice. And sometimes it depends on the type of inspection. If it's maybe a triggered or a for-cause inspection for FDA, the other foreign country, they may show up and observe with us. But if it's a routine inspection, sometimes they will, sometimes they may not. But the short answer is yes, we do notify them in advance that FDA will be within their country.
Thank you very much. Back to Mandy. Is the collaboration between the agencies limited to exchange of inspection results, or do the agencies rely on each other's results and take that into consideration to avoid duplication?
Okay, so that is a future goal to see what we can do in terms of joint inspections, as well as if we've already conducted an inspection of that marketing authorization application, how that can be used by the other agencies within the collaboration, and if it meets a certain requirements. That's an area of work to explore. But in the case study that I presented yesterday, that was an example of where the inspection outcome was shared with other regulatory agencies within this collaboration, and then they were able to use that to then inform what they needed to do next. So rather than actually repeating and starting from scratch, they had some information of areas already covered, and they could explore other areas. For example, go to maybe foreign sites that we weren't able to inspect to look at the data further.
Fantastic. Reza, what criteria or considerations does Health Canada utilize when they're selecting submissions for a joint inspection? Maybe this is something that's been discussed among the three agencies, yeah.
Right. So the main criteria we consider for conducting joint inspection is timing. It's in order for Health Canada to inspect, we need to have that CTA, that submission received by Health Canada. So timing is the main criteria. If we have that CTA too, then if it's a common interest for us too, then we are interested to conduct joint inspection. And if we don't have that CTA and there is an opportunity to do collaborative inspection, it falls into the other criteria that I spoke during my presentation, is the observational. So we try to observe those inspections.
Great. Final question, and this again is more sharing love. So this is kind of open to anyone, but maybe I'll start with Mandy since she's to my direct right. Do you foresee engaging other agencies, for example, EMA, PMDA, Pan-African Agency, in any collaborations?
Okay, I'll start and then I'll pass on to my colleagues to answer, because you know, there are different collaborations within each agency, but we're also looking at some of the more sort of bigger collaborations that we have. So one of the collaborations that we do have is PICS, and we're creating an expert circle for GCP within that. And there's also one for pharmacovigilance. So for GCP, that means we're really concentrating on inspectors and inspectors training and guidance and harmonization. So that's a very new area that's being explored specifically for inspections. So there's PICS, and then within the MHRA, there are other collaborations as well. We have the Access and Project Orbis, so we're looking into those areas too. So we continue to collaborate with other agencies going forward. So I will pass over to Lakeisha.
Thanks, Mandy, and great question. Within FDA, there are other collaborations, but specifically within OSI, we do have a collaboration with EMA and PMDA. It's very similar to our MHRA and Health Canada collaboration, where we meet bi-monthly to discuss common applications. That started in 2009. The goal, and I think Mandy kind of alluded to this in her presentation, is to invite other agencies into the collaboration, because it's always better for us to do more. You can do more with less. So that's the goal. But we already have collaborations in OSI with EMA and PMDA. Thank you.
Thank you. So obviously, of course, our primary collaboration is with US-FDA and MHRA. But beside that, we welcome any other collaboration which can enhance our ability to safeguard our mandate is to protect Canadians. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Session 5 completed. All right. So now I'd like to bring Dr. Grandinetti back up to the stage. For those of you who may not have been here yesterday, Dr. Grandinetti is a reviewer and subject matter expert in the Good Clinical Practice Assessment Branch of the Division of Clinical Compliance Evaluation and Office of Scientific Investigations and CEDAR at FDA. She's going to provide kind of a wrap up and some closing remarks.
Thank you, Ryan. Wow, what a great second day. So I am honored to be giving the closing remarks for day 2. And in full transparency, to get this gig, I had to promise management that I wouldn't go rogue on the closing remarks. So I'll be good, I'll be brief, and I'll stick to the message. All kidding aside, today can be summed up into 3 main themes. The first theme is a recurring theme of this and past symposiums, and that is risk proportionality. And really understanding how adopting and implementing the risk proportionate approaches provide flexibility in applying the E6 GCP guideline to the conduct of the clinical trial. The second theme is transforming adversity into opportunity, how disruption from the pandemic created opportunities for positive change. And then our third theme today is collaboration equals harmonization and innovation. So let's start with the theme of risk proportionality. Yesterday, we learned that the E6 GCP guideline is currently undergoing its third revision that emphasizes using a risk proportionate approach throughout the clinical trial lifecycle. Today, we heard how the risk proportionate approach carries over to sponsor oversight. Because not all trials are the same, and there is no one-size-fits-all approach to sponsor oversight, sponsors should use a risk proportionate approach to their trials, to oversight of their trials. And that oversight starts with quality by design. You should identify your critical to quality factors specific for your trial. You should conduct and document your risk assessments and implement risk management and oversight strategies that are proportionate to the risk to participants and the importance of the data collected. Another important takeaway from the sponsor oversight section is that while there seems, and I think Jason used the word reticence, by those involved in the conduct of clinical trials to adopt risk proportionate approaches, regulators have supported and continues to support this approach for at least the last decade. Another takeaway is focus on what matters. We heard that the goal isn't perfection. The goal is not to make major screw-ups in the important places. It is about shifting our focus from data perfection to what is important to data reliability and subject safety. We also heard from Adil about the importance of sponsor oversight when using complex trial designs. So for example, those that are adaptive in nature, use diverse operational approaches, and use real-world data sources. In conducting these types of trials, advantages and limitations exist. And it would be important in trials with complex designs that a sponsor's approach to oversight be risk-based. Sponsors should prioritize the critical data and conduct, again, their risk assessments. And these assessments should be updated as the trial evolves and changes. And sponsors should also have robust change control processes in place. Barbara told us about the expanded use of service providers to perform study-related activities and how sponsors must be thoughtful and exercise due diligence when selecting and overseeing these service providers. We heard several case examples illustrating important areas where we've seen study conduct issues. And Barbara also provided us with some excellent tips on what should be considered when using multiple service providers in a trial. For example, sponsors should ensure that the contracts with the service providers are well written and tasks and responsibilities are clearly outlined. While risk proportionality was a recurring theme in session 2, that session's overriding theme was how we transformed adversity into opportunity. Strategies for surviving the pandemic not only facilitated faster adoption of more flexible clinical trial designs, operational approaches, and use of real-world data sources, but it facilitated important changes in how regulatory agencies operated. Regulatory agencies had to think out of the box and develop innovative and alternative approaches to conducting inspections and regulatory audits to assess clinical trial conduct and regulatory compliance. Jason described how trials were adapted to include many decentralized elements during the pandemic and how the pandemic forced us to adopt widespread risk proportionality rather than just considering it as a good to have. Jennifer described the positive change that happened in Health Canada as a result of trying to survive the pandemic and how our colleagues in Health Canada started conducting compliance readiness inspections. We heard about their methodologies and their processes and procedures for conducting these inspections, along with case examples and some lessons learned from these case examples. And Richard explained how FDA also had to adapt and develop alternative ways of assessing study conduct and regulatory compliance during the pandemic by conducting remote regulatory audits. In session 3, Jen, Jenna, and Rachel took a deeper dive in helping us understand the pros and cons of conducting remote inspections and regulatory audits. We received some good insider information on what's involved in the planning of these inspections, how these the resources that are needed, how remote inspections are conducted, and some inspection findings that were observed during these remote inspections. All of our regulators detailed the limitations or hurdles to conducting inspections remotely, with Jenna telling us that a big hurdle for FDA inspectors are local data privacy requirements when inspecting international clinical investigators. Overall, though, the way we had to conduct inspections during the pandemic was a positive outcome for change. It was how we transformed adversity into opportunity. It's clear that remote inspections are a valuable tool, and we will probably be seeing more of these in the future, provided we can work through the hurdles. The third theme today of collaboration equals harmonization and innovation sums up the last 2 sessions. When we collaborate, we open ourselves up to new ideas and approaches that we may have ignored on our own. We challenge each other's assumptions and biases, and we build on each other's strengths. Collaboration is essential to innovation. No one can whistle a symphony. It takes an orchestra to play it. MHRA, FDA, and Health Canada are working towards modernizing our thinking and our respective countries' regulations governing clinical trials. Steve, Emily, and Hossein each highlighted the many efforts that are being undertaken to advance innovation in clinical trial design and conduct. And these efforts have already led to more efficiently designed and conducted clinical trials, and they will hopefully continue to go in that direction. Finally, Lakeisha, Reza, and Mandy talked about how we collaborate with each other to share inspection resources and information, to learn from each other, to observe each other on inspection, and to conduct joint inspections. And the collaboration really helps us to harmonize how we do things together. And then we heard of the promise of more things to come with this collaboration in the future. So in closing, let me leave you with one thing in particular that resonated with me. And that is, actual obstacles to innovation are more often rooted in tradition than the perceived barriers of burdensome regulations. So one of my FDA colleagues told me once that most of her life mantras are from Disney movies. So in honor of her, and to keep the theme going for all the Disney quotes today, I'm going to leave you with another Disney quote. So just because it's what's been done doesn't mean it's what should be done. So bonus points if you know what movie that's from, and if you know what FDA colleague uses Disney as all of her life mantras. So basically, if you've always done it that way, then it's probably wrong. So let's just keep moving forward, opening up new doors and doing new things. So thank you for your presence, your participation, and your persistence in all of our shared goals.